Hello everyone. Well, now that you've seen the demos of my individual effects I created, let me show you a little bit of how each one was made. We'll start with the first one. The first one is the tentacle trap. It was kind of an idea that a circle would appear and some tentacles would pop up, but as I was working through it, it kind of evolved into something slightly different. So if you notice, the tentacles only form when the player actually walks near. It's kind of a cool effect. When it first spawns, the circle does open by itself, and then energy starts flowing out like that. Let me step on it again. A circle appears, energy starts flowing out of the cracks. There's kind of this like water motif for some of the particles, and then the green particles themselves transition between just random energy and the tentacles. To accomplish this effect, it was a kind of a complex network. So if we look here and go into the effect, here is the graph. So we have the starting event that triggers all the rest of the stuff here, but let's take a look at a couple of different things here. So we have the summoning circle animation. I pre-made a summoning circle flipbook animation effect, and I reused that a bunch of times in all the other effects. I can go over that. I'll go over that at the end just a little bit. So that comes in here, the time goes here, it's sampled onto this curve, the curve is multiplied by the grow rate, and that's what causes the circle size to show up and there. It is also used for the radius of the spawning of the energy. So this is the initial tree for spawning the energy, it's doing 30 particles per second times the time. They have a position of a cone. They kind of shrink and grow over their life. Oh, this isn't the initial particles. This is the bubbles. There's individual little tiny bubbles that show up randomly throughout the area of the summoning circle. Let me see if I can show you those. 1 second here. You might not be able to see them. Trigger it. So if you see the little tiny bubbles, it's kind of what also I tried adding the water effect to it. There's the little tiny bubbles kind of towards the feet area. That's this first graph. And that's why I only had a spawn rate of 30. I was like, what is it? Anyhow, and it does some turbulence on them, and it outputs a particle. It does some size over life, so they grow and shrink over the course of their life. They slowly rise, and it's an additive VFX shader that I created, a bubble shader. And they face the camera plane, of course, that way, because they're just sprites facing towards the camera plane, and their color adjusts over the course of their life. Next is the blue energy. The blue energy is kind of like the water, and it has a spawn rate times 40,000 times whatever the current set on the time is, so it ramps up to 40,000. And then its set size, 0.4. It does grab a position from a map. I created a point cache asset from a crack texture that I created in After Effects, and that is used for the spawn location. So if you notice how the blue energy kind of comes out in this like weird crack, like wavy pattern, that's what that's from. We had some lifetime, some velocity, and then we add some Perlin noise, some turbulence, and we output particle points. We're not actually outputting meshes or quads. I'm actually using individual pixels just because it's a little bit lighter, and I think it still is pretty cool looking. The next one, it is the green particles, the energy particles that become the actual tentacles. This is the one that's kind of interesting. So if you look here, we got your spawn rate again. We've got position from map, so they're coming from that same crack. We set the lifetime. We set a position of rotation of 90. That way I do that on both of them actually. Because the default is vertically, I had to turn it horizontally so it's on the ground plane. And then I create a target position from another map. I exported a point cast position from a tentacles mesh I created between Houdini and ZBrush and some other things. And so that creates this kind of three-dimensional target for the particles. Then I give them some depth, I give them some turbulence. I tried to make them collide with the depth buffer, but it didn't seem to actually be affecting. And then I blend the target position. And the position, it gets the current position of the particles, and then it gets the position of, this is a accessible target transformation. And it takes that and it finds the distance between the current position and the player, and then it divides it by 5. That's kind of the speed at which it transitions. And then I delay it by 1 just because I didn't want it to be completely like too fast. And then it ramps up and it transitions to that target position. Then it's an additive shader that. So by using this player, which is a transform I added here on the side, these are all accessible variables on this side here, this sideboard, if you're not familiar with VFX Graph. It allowed me to read the player's position. I made a little portion on it called just called target on the player controller. Yeah, see target. And so when I look at the tentacle trap in Outliner, and we go to the tentacle VFX, there's actually a transform binder, and we actually bound the property player to the target transform. And that allowed us to use that as a kind of a variable to drive the ramp between the different forms of the energy. And that is pretty much that particular effect. Moving on to the next effect. The next effect is probably my simplest effect that I created, which was just a generic portal. This was probably the first effect I created out of the 3, where it's just the symbol draws, energy starts emitting from that pattern, and then there's a ring with a sign distance field in the middle of it, and some turbulence, and all the particles are going into that and dying with some nice color ramping. Looking at that particular effect, I'll pull that one up. Once again, exposed properties that are useful. But so on this particular one, it's a really simple. We've got your summoning circle and summoning circle properties for your basic summoning circle. We've got the stop event, the start event. The start event triggers all 3 layers. This is a total time, and it's a curve to accelerate the release of the particles. And that's for the initial circle at the bottom. I'm using a point cache that I generated from a texture. You can actually generate point cache files from a texture file for positions. And then I take that position from map, and then I get the current position, and I transport it by 90 degrees to rotate it sideways. I add some turbulence, I add some noise. I do output quads here. That's using the sparkle VFX texture. And then I adjust the sizes and scale by speed, so it gives it kind of a little tail. And they face the camera. The third portion of that particular effect is another ramp with over time. It is we get a circle, we create a circle, radius 5 above. We set the position, we adjust the scale a little bit to make it not a perfect circle, but more of an oval kind of portal. And then in the center of it, there's a sphere that it's conforming to. And this is how it attracts it to that particular sphere. That's how all the particles are coming out from the turbulence and then starting to drift towards the uh, thing. Then I add some linear drag and I added some additional turbulence. And then I output particle points, because that way I can have a lot of particles with less headroom, because they're just pixels. There's no textures on them. It's just a colored pixel. All right, and the third effect. The third effect was fun. I wanted to do something different, some kind of summoning circle that's protective on something, and so I came up with the idea that it's kind of a trap. You know, if the player starts walking towards the pedestal with the treasure on it, the portal shows up, and then it's basked with, or the summoning circle shows up and it's basked with energy, and the energy conforms to the object. You can either do it right. This is just done with a simple sphere attractor, just like the portal was. However, you can plug in a custom sign distance fields you can generate in Houdini. The particles are the initial particles are drawn in a circular pattern, and each one grabs a random frame from a flip book. And because it's grabbing that random frame from the flip book every time it makes a cycle, even though the same symbols are spinning down there at the bottom on the texture there, the individual floating up pixels are always like evolving, like they're just popping off of that particular thing, and then they're releasing particles over time as they're going. So if we look at that graph, that particular effect, the energy alter, we have the energy effect. We bound the transform to the, oh, yeah, that's another thing. We bound the transform of the ball or the object or whatever to the actual sign distance field, the same way we plugged in the player's stuff to the other one. And so when I kick this ball, it rolls, but the particles still go to try to protect it until I walk out of the effect, of course. But even now, like if I stand here, it will actually just chase after the ball and then protect it. It's kind of a cool effect. Yeah. So looking at this graph, let's look at this one. The magic ball is got a property binder on that effect. It is bound to, of course, the target's transform. The magic ball is just a ball, or well, there's a cube, and then there's a ball with the collider rigid body, of course. And then there's the disabling square. But if we look at the graph, so we have our initially summoning circle that's cycling through based on some different attributes here. Then we have the initial event here where it's spawning particles at a rate of 20 particles a second. It sets their age to 0 initially. It's emitting from a cone at radius 5, but it's actually emitting in a sequence. So I'm using the height sequencer and arc sequencer and periodic total time. And so every second it makes a loop around, and it's kind of cool that way. And then it multiplies their lifetime by whatever the sequence is times 60. And then it updates the age, it adds ages, it does a flipbook player, it sets the force, and it gets the position and transforms it up just a smidge. Actually, it transforms it. Oh, it rotates it slightly so that it never makes the particle the exact same spot. That's right. And then when I came out to the output quad, I do a random number per particle, and I remap that input between 0 and 63, and that's what flipbook frame that particle is. And that's how I spawn the random symbols on those particles. Then it does on a constant rate over time. Once the particle is in existence, it does this event. And it spawns this event, 4,000 of these little events where all those things emit particles. It inherits the source position, it inherits the source velocity, much like a subemitter. This is how you would set up subemitters inside of VFX Graph. It does have a position of a sphere initially, is when the local position, it's emitting from a sphere, but it's a very tiny sphere, right exactly where those symbols are. It gets a lifetime, their size is set, it adds some turbulence, and then it makes it conform to a sphere. The sphere is then plugged into the target, and then the scale is plugged into the radius of the target. So if I shrunk or enlarged the sphere, the field around it would shrink and grow. I also added a little bit of buffer so that it wasn't resting right on the sphere. And then we output a target quad, orient along velocity, scaled it a little bit different, changed its color over life, and used some nice, beautiful particles. And that's how I made the different effects.